Hi guys, I'm Jetta and today I'm going to teach you guys how to make pate choux from scratch. So first things first, we are going to put 4 ingredients into a pot and heat them up all together. So the first thing we're going to add is a cup of water and then 1 whole stick or 8 tablespoons of unsalted butter. You want to use unsalted butter so the dough will become fluffier, and you also want to make sure that this stick of butter is at room temperature so when it heats up in the pot and melts, it does not become chunky. And then we're just going to add a 1/4 tablespoon of salt, and we're going to bring up the heat, and we're just going to wait for all of that to melt. And to make the butter melt faster, we are going to cut the butter up with the wooden spoon, and this wooden spoon is going to be used to mix in all your ingredients. And you want to use a wooden spoon because if you use a whisk or any other ingredient, it's just going to get stuck, and a wooden spoon doesn't add extra chemicals to the dough, which is not what you want. And so here I am just cutting up the butter with the wooden spoon, and it's kind of getting stuck to the spoon, but that's okay. And if you see all that leftover butter, I'm just going to stick my spoon back into that cup of pot of water just to melt all the butter, so to make sure we get the full 8 tablespoons of butter. And so now that you can see that the butter is beginning to melt, and this is exactly what you want to see when you're but the butter isn't melting that fast, so I'm stirring the water butter mixture around just to make sure that that butter melts nice and quickly. Another way to get the butter to melt pretty quickly is to lean or to push the butter against the edges of the pot, because these parts are very hot, and it's hotter than the water mixture inside, which will melt the butter faster. And so now you can see that all the butter has melted into the water, and this is exactly what you want. And now you just want to wait for this to come to a boil. And as you can see, it's beginning to simmer because you can look at the outer edges and those little bubbles are forming, which means that the mixture is going to boil pretty soon. And as you can see, the bubbles are forming a lot faster, and there's more of them coming. And so this is when you start to measure out your flour, and by doing you just want to use a cup of flour, and you just pour that straight into that butter mixture, and this basically creates a huge roux, which is just a French word for thickener. And this is basically what pate choux is. It's just roux with eggs in it. And so now you will want to begin to mix this mixture up as fast as you can, and breaking all those clumps, because all those clumps are full of flour, and you want to make sure that the flour is broken so you do not have raw flour in the dough. And so now, as you can see, I am mixing it as fast as I possibly can while making sure I'm not splattering it. And it should, to me, it kind of begins to smell like mashed potatoes, and that's a good thing, and that's what you want to smell. And because that means that the flour is cooking, which is exactly what you want. So now I'm going through and breaking up all those extra flour clumps, because I do not want my batter to be really chunky. And now I'm just going to give it a huge stir once again. Make sure the stove is off at this point. You don't want to begin cooking your dough quite yet. You just need to let it set up and let the flour fold in. And as you can see, it does look like mashed potatoes. So right now I'm just putting the heat back on, and I'm going to begin to push the dough onto the edges of the pot, cooking the flour. And by cooking the flour, this creates a fluffier dough, and it also kind of begins the cooking process. So when you put it in the oven, you can put it in for a smaller amount of time. And so now, as you can see, I am pressing up the edges, pressing up the dough onto the edges of the pot, and this should begin if it begins to sizzle, that is exactly what you're looking for. And when you're done pushing um the dough off the edge of the pot, you want to mix it into a huge ball just like what I did. And you want to do this for about 1 to 2 minutes, because if you do it for any longer you can begin to burn the dough, and that's just not good. And if this does happen and the dough does begin to caramelize and burn, you have to start over. There's no coming back from it really, unless you really like burnt dough, which I don't think you probably like, because it is not healthy for you and can give you cancer. And so now I'm just gonna empty out the cooked dough into my KitchenAid bowl, and this is gonna go into my KitchenAid mixer in a second. So now I'm just gonna scrape the edges of the bowl and get the rest of the dough out. And make sure you get the most amount of dough, you wanna scrape the bottom of the pan with your wooden spoon. And this is another reason why you wanna use a wooden spoon, so it doesn't scrape and scratch the pot, and it makes it easier to clean, which is a double win. So now I'm going to bring this dough over to the KitchenAid mix stand. And if you don't have a KitchenAid, you can always use a hand mixture. It doesn't mix the dough as well. So now I'm going to use my flat paddle and turn it on to stir. And this is going to cool the dough. And the reason we do this is to make sure when we add the egg, it doesn't cook them, and it'll make the paste lighter and more velvety. And so every couple minutes you want to stir the dough and let it wait just 5 minutes before turning it on, so you don't break up a part of the dough, which is not what you want. And so while my dough is cooling, we are going to crack 4 eggs, and we're going to put them into a mini pitcher. So but first, when we crack our eggs, we put them in a smaller separate um bowl, so if any eggs get in there, it's easier to fish out. And as if you notice, I'm cracking my eggs on a flat surface, and you want to do this to make sure that the shells don't go in the mixture. It's just another easier way to make sure you don't have to fish for shells. And you want to crack 4 eggs. And the reason the recipe calls for 3, but I like cracking 4 because sometimes you just need an extra egg, and this is an extra. And you also need eggs for when you're coating the pate choux before it goes in the oven. So if you have an extra egg, it makes your life a lot easier. So as you can see, I am fishing out a eggshell right now, and thank God I put it in the little bowl before putting it in the big picture, because then it would just take a lot longer to fish from 2 eggs than 3 eggs. And as you can see, I'm just looking through, and oh, I found another shell, and I'm just taking that out right now to make sure that the dough is shellless, which is what you want because it's no fun eating shells. So I'm going to pour my 3rd egg into the mini pitcher, and make sure you get all the egg whites because a lot of that likes to stick to the edges of the bowl, and you just want to make sure that it comes out so you get the use of the full egg. And so now I have my 4th egg cracked, getting that mini shell out. And make sure to wash your hands before and after this process. Before, to make sure you're not putting germs into the eggs, and after, to make sure if these eggs did have salmonella that you wouldn't get food poisoning. And as right now I am washing my hands, and I'm about to pour the 4th egg into. And so now I'm going to take my fork and I'm going to whisk these eggs. And by whisking the eggs, it makes it a lot easier in the blender, and I make sure that the yolks and whites are evenly mixed together, because if they go straight into the mixer unbeaten, then it just doesn't you don't know if the yolks completely got broken. So now I'm just going to add approximately 2 eggs worth, and this part, it's not you can't really make sure that you're putting 1 egg at a time. So at first I like to put half the mixture in because I know I'm going to need this much. And as you can see, the mixture kind of looks like it's breaking apart, but that's okay because that is what you want. And the dough is been fully mixed when it starts to look a lot more like this. And you want to put turn up the speed to make sure that everything is beaten together. So I'm adding in potentially my third egg, and it is looking really, really chunky right now, but sooner or later it's going to, right now, as right now it looks like paste. And I'm adding a little bit of the fourth egg in because it looks a little dry. And so as you can see, it looks like the dough is beginning to find its shape. And I'm now just going to lower my dough, get a spatula, and push the dough onto the middle. So make sure it's all getting mixed in evenly. And you want to do this between the second and third egg to make sure that you're getting all the dough. And you want to make sure you get the dough off the paddle because sometimes the dough just likes to stick there, and that's not what you want. You want it to be evenly mixed. So now I'm going to take a little bit of dough with my clean fingers, and I'm just going to feel it out. So as you can see, it's really sticky because it's sticking to my hands a lot, and that is not what you want. So I know I need to add an extra egg to make sure that it is less sticky and less gummy and more velvety. So I'm turning on the mixture, and I'm going to add my fourth and final egg. So that means I have to crack another egg, but that's okay because it's just one less break I have to do. And if you saw that little brown part, don't worry, that's part of the egg. It is not a shell, don't worry. I was kind of scared when I saw it too. I just recognized it as part of an egg because I've cracked so many eggs in my life. And so, yeah. And we're going to slowly add the fourth one in because you might not need the whole fourth egg. And as you can see, it's beginning to look it looks kind of like cookie batter, really smooth cookie batter, but that's okay. And this mixture is completely done. And I'm just going to get the dough off the paddle, and I'm going to get that into my piping bag. So now that I've scraped the dough off the bowl, I'm going to set my oven to 425, and this is one of the two cook temperatures where you're going to be cooking the dough at. So now I have my pastry bag in a cup, and this makes it easier to put the dough in the cup because the bag is already standing up and the edges are folded over so you know when it is full. And I'm just using an extra spoon, and as you can see, the texture of the consistency of this dough is very sticky, and it looks very velvety. And this is the perfect dough. And so now I'm just going to be using my spatula because it's more efficient, and I'm just going to begin to add the dough to the bag. And so now I've begun to piping my Pate Choux, and it's all about the flick of the wrist at the very end. So the faster you flick your wrist, the smoother they come out. And I've cut my bag with a radius of like a 1/4 inch, so that means it's a diameter of 1/2 inch, and that's to make dough. So you first want to apply pressure and then quickly release pressure on this dough, and I'm creating about half inch cream puffs. They're on the smaller side, and I like them this way because they're easier to fit in your mouth, and you can use it for more occasions. And so with the ones you kind of mess up on, it's okay. I have a technique for you guys when you've messed up. And so as you can see, some of them have tips at the end, and we're going to take those down when we're done. So when you're piping out this Pate Choux, you want to apply pressure, and then you want to quickly flick your wrist, and this creates that perfect circle form. And you don't want to swirl it like ice cream because then when it puffs up, it looks like two tiers, and you can see everything on this dough. You can see if you can see some of my Pate Choux circles have 2 layers on them. When they puff, you will definitely be able to see that there was see the crease, and that is not what you want because they're not that appealing. So now I'm going to take my last and final fifth egg, and I'm just going to separate the whites from the yolks. You can use this yolk in the pastry cream, but I'm not going to make pastry cream, so I'm just going to put this in my egg bowl just in case I need to find an extra reason to use it. And so now this is the fixing process. So if you wet your hands with water, the dough will not stick to your hand, and you can basically form these pate choux dip puffs into any way you want. So I'm just smoothing out the edges and making sure that the bottoms and the tops, are not very pointy, and make sure they're not too tiered. And as you can see, I'm not fixing all of them because I don't want all of them to look like, most people do want them to look like, but that's just me. I kind of like the unique, fun shapes that they come out of. They make when they're puffed. So now I'm going to take the egg whites, not the yolk. You can use the yolk, but I prefer egg whites because it makes them crispier and not as brown. And I'm just going to paint that on to the tops of my pate choux puffs. And you want to make sure you're not drenching them, because if you drench them, the eggs, it'll conflict with the rising of the evaporation of the water, which is not really what you want, because that's just not very, it's not fun when they don't puff, because then it's just like, what's the whole point of, baking these if they don't puff necessarily. And the brush is also another way to get smooth your tops, but I like to run my hands through the water first, just to make sure, just so I don't have to destroy them with my brush. So now I'm going to take my first batch and put them in the oven at 425 for about 15 minutes. And during this time, this is where really the cream puffs begin to pop up. And so now from 425, you want to set them to 375 for 15 minutes, and then to 300 for 12 minutes. And this is the final cooking process. And so now that they're done, you want to use your oven mitts to make sure you don't get burned, and you want to take those beautiful cream puffs out of the oven. As you can see, not very dangerous. I'm injured right now, so don't hop on over. Have a family member help you so you don't burn yourself. And as you can see, beautiful on the inside, and they are just a really slow motion, just so you can see how beautiful they are. I'm gonna crack another one open for you guys to just see how beautiful they puffed with that great shell. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you learned a lot, and I'll see you guys next time.